Hi, this is Joe from Espresso Outlet. One of the questions we get quite a bit is relating to the DF64 Gen 2. And when people get the grinder, sometimes they're reporting that they're not able to grind fine enough. Now, the way this grinder is designed, it's almost impossible for it not to grind fine enough because it's a collar adjusted grinder. When you're turning this collar, it's pushing the burrs closer together. Now, that's not saying that people aren't having an issue. It's just with this design, it's probably not the collar. So what it can be is we have quite a few people doing this where they adjust the grind size indicator. So they turn this and they adjust the grind size indicator thinking that that's how the adjustment is made. It's understandable, so not blaming someone if you think that, but that is not the correct way. All this is an indicator. It does nothing in terms of adjusting the grind size. So that's probably the most common issue people have. Another one is relating to where the chirp point is on here. So if there's coffee between the burrs, I turn the grinder on now. If there's coffee between the burrs, I don't have any now, but when you adjust smaller, sometimes it makes a chirping noise. And it's the beans between the burrs, it's not actually the burrs touching. Right now, the burrs are touching. It's slightly past zero, but sometimes the sticker may not be set 100% right. And part of it is when it's put on, it's set slightly off so the burrs don't chirp. The ideal grind size will depend on the type of brew method you use and that kind of thing. But for espresso, you're going to be in a pretty fine grind size range. So for espresso, you might be somewhere between 0 and 30. But depending on the burrs that are put in, sometimes people will get the stock burrs and the espresso shots will turn out well around 20. But if you get like SSP high uniformity burrs, they tend to grind pretty low down to get for optimal extraction. So it depends on the burrs, it depends on the coffee beans. Some are going to grind finer, some are going to grind coarser. So that's one of the things. If you're down in this range for a given coffee and a given burr, you might be okay. That might be what's ideal for that coffee. It might also be that maybe the sticker was set slightly off to avoid the burrs hitting each other. So that can potentially be one of the things. Another thing is if you take the collar off, so you take it off, you clean it, you put it back on, and when you're putting it back on, it's best to zero it out to the true 0 point, like kind of tighten it pretty tight, like that, and then go back to your desired grind size. The reason is you want this to fully seat the wave spring. So the wave spring might have a little shift in it, and there's also these rubber seats. So if this is slightly pulled up, that's slightly lifted, if you put this collar back on, and this is still slightly lifted, it's gonna grind coarse because now the burr is tilted. It's tilted slightly because it's not properly in the seat. So when you're putting it back in, you gotta make sure these three are properly seated, and then when you put the collar on, tighten it all the way because that's going to force this upper burr carrier to fully seat in those rubber seats, in those rubber seats. So that's another thing. Another thing is if you take it apart and clean it, got to make sure the wave spring is actually on. If it's not on, you're going to have grind size issues. If you take the burrs off for any reason, and you're cleaning it or something like that, you got to make sure you put them back on in the kind of like you would a car tire. So put tighten one screw a little bit, another screw, another screw, another screw, and slowly tighten them. And as you're doing it, kind of shift the burr slightly back and forth. That's going to ensure that the burr is properly tightened and properly seated. There's a rubber seal around there. You got to make sure the seal isn't pinched. And the same thing on the upper burr carrier. So when you're tightening it, do it like a car tire, one at a time, and then it's probably a good idea to mark one of these ends to pull the burr off the same way it was taken off, because this can affect the alignment. So you might make a mark here. A lot of them, the manufacturer puts a mark on for doing the calibration at the factory, but sometimes, like here, right there, it has a mark. So that's going to be in the top position, and you put it, make a note of that before you take it off. And when you put it back on, put it back into top position, because that's going to be the aligned position. If you take it off and you shift it over here, it's not going to be in the aligned position. So that's another thing that has some effect on the grind size. It's not going to have a drastic effect. We've done a lot of testing on these, and the alignment is quite good. You can always fiddle around with it and make it better, make it perfect. It takes a lot of time to do that. That's not something we can do, but it is, for the most part, quite well aligned. So now I'm putting the collar back on, and I'm going to force it past 0 pretty tight to seat those rubber seats. The rubber seat, rubber seat, rubber seat. I'm tightening it to force this upper burr carrier to sit down in those seats. If one of these ends is not sitting in the seat, it's going to be tilted and you're going to get bad grind quality. So once you do that, you can adjust it back to, say, 10, 15. It's better to err on the side of slightly too large. And then just tighten this in place, the adjustment indicator. And that is going to be most of the coarseness issues. Because this is collar adjusted, if this is properly seated in the rubber seats, this can keep tightening and tightening and tightening. So those burrs are going to squish together, and it's pretty much going to be impossible not to get a grind size that can choke an espresso machine. One of the things to be careful of, if you're grinding really fine, is it's very easy to cause channeling in your espresso pucks. So there can be a point where you're so fine that the water just kind of forces its way through and creates channeling. So sometimes that's the case. People are grinding too fine. It's also the case that people put too much coffee in the filter basket. That's a very common one. So you put too much in, put it in the group head. When you put it in the group head, the coffee is sitting too close and it bumps the bottom of the shower screen, and it causes a crack. So that's another thing where it's usually not too coarse. It's because of channeling. You can also get channeling from cracking the puck during tamping and things like that. But those aren't really grinder related at all. It's more just technique and learning the technique, learning the espresso machine. Sometimes if you have an espresso machine that has a lot of pressure, has high bars, it can force its way through any of the channels that are created. One of the things that is highly beneficial is using a WDT tool to whisk the coffee around, not only to break up any clumps, but also to level it. I use a WDT tool and I use a tamper. So those might be some things to consider if you're having some issues with channeling. This is a very good grinder. Every grinder we've gotten back where people have said it's too coarse, we can pull great shots and we have no trouble dialing them in. So it's important to kind of rule out all these issues that could potentially be there. And if you're still not having luck, we can certainly look at taking a return or something like that. But it is a very reliable grinder, and I am confident in the fact that it can grind very fine.